joining. There are already 50 people here, so that's great. And thanks everyone that have joined today. The lineup today, we have Alon, the product team lead from Finout. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you today. We also have David Gross from GPU Economics. How are you doing, David?
I'm good. Good morning from California.
Good stuff. As you have seen, we have different connections from around the world because we also have Binap. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking, Victor, and thanks for having me over here. And good evening from India, by the way, team.
So yeah, we have places from like almost every continent in the world. So it's for
Right.
people for. So yeah, it's great. Yeah, some varied people from Amsterdam, Barcelona, UK, Atlanta. So that's great. Very varied attendance as always. So pleasure to have you guys talking today. As mentioned, Alon will start, then we'll move to the panel, and then we'll go with the Q&A session. So, Alon, whenever you are ready, I think we have a lot of people joining today. So, whenever you're ready, feel free to start sharing the slides.
Yeah, let's go for it. So thanks everyone. Pleasure to have you all today. I actually want to start. It's going to be an interesting challenge, right? It's a big topic. I want to keep it concise and to the point and leave enough time for all of us to discuss the interesting stuff. So I will take about 15, 20 minutes of your time, and I want to walk you really through starting from the fundamentals, like what is it really? LLM AI economics in 2025, how does it look like? So going to start with the fundamentals really, and move on to the more hopefully practical area for us as FinOps practitioners, the measure and the means that we can take to really help. I think Victor just said it before we kicked it off, kind of like not lose our budget, right? So let's start with no further ado. So FinOps for AI, right? Does it really mean? Why is it really worth having a dedicated webinar? And how is it different from any other FinOps practice or any other cloud FinOps cloud in the traditional world, so to speak, right? So uh, FinOps for AI is really the way we see it is financial accountability for your AI infrastructure, and helping team really optimize cost, usage, and value all the way from experimentation to production in scale. So, what is the same? What is really different? So let's start maybe with the obvious. So it is cloud-hosted workload, right? No difference than any other, EC2 instance that you are running. It is metered by usage, either via API usage or in some cases the GPU utilization. Same here, no news, right? It is visible in your billing data, at least with the absolute majority of the vendors that do expose this data, at least the big one, right? The hyperscalers, the CSPs, that's for sure. But how is it really different, and why we all of us believe that it's worth taking the time and really educate ourselves, right? So the price per unit, especially when we think about training and we think about the more what is maybe not really advanced anymore, but the training element, the cost per unit is higher. It could be significantly higher. So that's definitely one thing that is very much different. As new technology that emerges very, very quickly, governance frameworks are not as mature as we would like them to be, perhaps. We're gonna drill into it later on in a few slides. So that's definitely, it's a calls for all the FinOps experts in the world out there, right, to be very much on top of that, because by default, governance is really just shaping up. And I think, to me, more than anything else, you know, the pace of the growth of adopting AI, Gen AI, moreover, the pace that it grows is just unprecedented, and it's almost, unless you're very much intentional about it, I would almost say that it's very hard not to burn your budget and not to get to the point where, hey, okay, this is what we plan to use for the entire year, and we are kind of like mid-year, and what's up, right? So it's just the growth that is so quickly. We basically, in the last couple of months, we here in Finout, we had, I would say, 30 probably deep interviews and conversation with our users. And what we saw, what we heard from pretty much everyone, I think, across the board, like the smaller, all the way from the smaller companies that we serve to the very big enterprises, is that, what the guidance that engineering organization get from top leadership is that, hey, go for it. I need to see it in production. I want to see it. I want to see the value that it can really introduce and bring to the organization, and we're going to figure out about all the other stuff later, right? Which is a trap, to be honest, right? So we really want to understand all the nuances here. So tokens, I think by now most of the people really understand how it works. It's um, the rule of thumb, right, is that kind of like a word, typically kind of like a token, I'm sorry, typically 4 characters. Again, it's not exact science, but that's just a rule of thumb. But tokens are your unit of compute and value, actually, right? Um, the cost scales quite significantly as we think about input tokens as opposed perhaps to output token. And the reason I'm saying it, and of course, everything I'm saying here, there are different type of implementation that can be almost the opposite, but I'm talking about kind of like the what we see across the board commonly. So input is the piece of the puzzle here that you really control, and there is a tendency maybe to underestimate um, how much every single character in an input prompt that you take to production, the impact it has on the bottom line, right? Um, so input, output, you pay for both, different price, by the way. It's not just, we're not paying for calls, we're paying for the tokens. And I think, again, the main takeaway here is that pennies, pennies really for a single request can really turn it into thousands or perhaps even more. It depends on scale, of course, at the end of the month. Um, when trying to think about it holistically and cross use cases, cross implementations, cross vendors, I think there are 3 pillars that emerges and can help me at least to understand how to think about it, how to strategize around my LLM economics. So model choice, model selection. Um, I guess you know it by now. VP comes, hey, I want to have this and that, flow application in production. Um, Show me how you can work this magic, right? And then there is this tendency, which I can relate to, is, okay, I want to prove the value. I'm going to select the best model. So the best model, let's say GPT-5 nowadays, can be Claude Sonnet, 3.7 or whatever. Those are amazing models, right? And there is this tendency to just choose them, show the value. Great. What people perhaps tend to not put a lot of emphasis on is that the, the variance in cost is huge between the different models. The foundational model, of course, I'm saying. So let's take, for example, if we have in the far right of this our imaginary graph, we have a GPT-5, let's say. On the other side, you can find some of the AWS models like Nova. You can see Meta models like Llama. In many cases, and again, we're going to elaborate in a sec on this element as well. In many cases, those linear, cheaper for sure, models can be a very good selection, and it just and out, it just people not necessarily trying it out, working under this guidance of I want to show the value, I want to demonstrate value as soon as possible, right? Um, Context usage. So this is a very interesting element, in my opinion, that is really changing over time. Like I imagine, I'm hoping that we're gonna kind of like talk about it in the panel later on today. But um, there is this in a prompt, right? So you wanna you have a support AI app, and you want it's to the response to be as accurate as possible. So you're simply dumping everything you know about the user, about the organization that is raising the request or the concern. You're just dumping into the input prompt. So those are very expensive patterns. Alternatively, right, people will just use some sort of rug implementation or any other. I really don't want to go into kind of like implementation in this slide, but just acknowledge, just understand that those decisions are perhaps the most meaningful you can get, and in the case of FinOps, really impact or effect. Um, when it comes to LLM implementation, right? Like again, every word, every character costs money. So while it seems simple, maybe it is. It not necessarily cost effective. Um, and to that note, and I think again there is a you can see the silver lining here, right? There is technology. This technology is really amazing, right? And it's so simple to adopt and use. So some of the more heavy, let's say, architectural decisions are not necessarily um, considered in the way that they should be. So usage pattern, when you think about it, there is it is so easy and so compelling just to use the on-demand pattern. So now, in some cases, you're looking for a real-time answer. Sure, on-demand is probably the best or the only choice, perhaps in some cases, that you can use. But it's not always the case. And I think again, similar to what I just said about model selection, when it comes to user to on-demand as a leading usage pattern, it's obviously just because it's so simple, right? And it doesn't really take a whole lot to do. But again, not always the best approach, and definitely a very, very expensive decision. Um, you know, Commitments is just a very standard, I would say, FinOps practice. And in this case, again, no different. I would say that in many of the vendors that are just emerging, there is not a very mature commercial process as opposed to other cloud services that you're using, but it's definitely out there. And in some cases, in the case of large scales, it's definitely something that can be very cost effective. And specifically in the world of LLMs, um, caching, batching. Let's talk about that for a sec. Caching, prompt caching is perhaps it's starting to emerge as a best practice, but I think till the recent weeks, really, it was kind of like a hidden secret of people who really took the time to learn the domain. But um, straightforward explanation. Prompt caching is really the ability feature that is provided by most of the big players in the domain that can really, out of the box almost, just a toggle really, enable prompt caching, where basically the same prompts, if you're sending the same prompt kind of like in a limited time frame, you don't pay for the input tokens that, as we said, are quite pricey. So it's definitely, it's a no-brainer that those should be enabled. And I do see among our customers some that still haven't activated it. Batching. Talking about batching is almost like the opposite of on demand, right? There are many use cases that don't really require kind of like a real time, and in most of the cases, definitely with the CSPs, and also with the big players like OpenAI, Anthropic, if you are using batching and are willing to do the implementation, it can save you really up to 50% of the cost, right? Both input and output, by the way. So that's all of these just equal savings. So just keep that in mind, right? Um, so what's the big deal, right? We started by saying that, hey, is it different? It's the same as with everything else that I'm doing on my day to day. So I just kind of like to put, a spotlight on why is it such a big deal? Why are you guys all here? Took an hour to listen to us talking, right? Um, so let's start with the CSPs, right? Let's say with the AWS, GCP, Azure. Many of them actually implemented or supporting LLM in production via marketplace. What that really means is that the CSPs tend to be, I would say, I called it messy, just hard to use sometimes. It's not in the standard structure where you can easily get, usage data. It's not always trivial to read. Tagging is definitely a big gap for many organization out there. I think again, I would echo that this is everything here is moving so quickly. So I think from my perspective, at least, it seems like the big CSPs also did some wanted to move fast as everybody else, and along the way, perhaps decided not to implement the full support of tagging, spend and usage as with other native cloud services. Um, Multi-tools complexity, again, this is not a new problem, but I think in the world of AI, it's becoming a major problem because I imagine everybody in the audience use, at least three, if not more, tools in the organization. What you see here in the screenshot is actually from a survey we ran with our customers. That was in July. I imagine that if we would run it now, the numbers would probably be even higher. So creating this visibility or this single pane of glass that you can actually see the entire spend in a single dashboard is really not trivial. And I think it's like any new technology, it's a never-ending quest. Like when you put the work, you set it up, you have, let's say, you get to the point where you have this visibility and this governance framework that you want to have in place, but then suddenly, a different team from your organization decided that there is a new tool that they have to use. Great, you want to enable it. It's just never-ending stream of work for us to keep track on. So I think when we prepped to this webinar, like this forum, I think this sentence, like "get a seat at the table," was the one thing that kept, we just brought it up over and over. Like I think that there is a unique opportunity here that FinOps practitioners are a well-established fact, I hope by now. And I think that as opposed to, let's say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, now there is the opportunity and there is a need to get a seat at the table, right? And I want to kind of like just to highlight, I don't want to go into every single detail here in this slide, but just to showcase this, why is it so important for us to get a seat at the table, using a few examples, right? So we talked about model selection, right? Again, I'm an engineer. All I care about is really just delivering the best feature out there. Probably am not that concerned about the associated cost in many cases. And I think that model select, specifically in the world, in the topic of model selection, model choice, early decisions, like getting a seat at the table early in the journey, is so important because first of all, obviously it compounds over time, right? Like if you're choosing, again, let's say a very pricey model, in a matter of weeks or months, it really sums up to very significant amounts. But I think more than that, in the world of LLM and Gen AI in general, evaluation of results is challenging. It's not an easy task, and switching models post deployment to production is something that will require a lot of effort, and often it just won't be prioritized, and then you kind of like you are stuck with a very pricey model, although you could make the argument that this is, it's not justified, like it's not the one that you really have to use, right? So just kind of like this is as an example of why getting a seat at the table when talking about model selection is so important. um, I think similar to that, architectural decisions, right? Again, you probably won't be the one that's going to make the final decision, but bringing the FinOps perspective to the table is very, when we're talking about the architectural approach, is extremely important. So just to, again, give an example, I think it's quite relevant nowadays. Let's say, OpenAI announced an integration with AWS where they allow users in Bedrock to use kind of like a relatively lean model that you can actually host, right? And there are many other models that you can actually host. So you think about it, if those are sufficient, and based on my based on my experience in the last couple of months, there are many cases where those are sufficient. Those are really powerful models. Those, I mean, the models that you can actually host and you don't have to use via API. Um, so taking pushing the organization toward hosting models again relatively simply in a simple manner nowadays, um, that can be a significant decision that's going to have major impact on your financials, right? And I think again, circling back to what I started with here, I think there is a unique opportunity here to avoid cleanup mode, and not just again wake up in a year from now. Oh, this is the spend is just going nuts. It's uncontrollable. Let's now start with running and pushing all the organizations to start tagging the data as they should, to perhaps rethink if on demand is the best approach, and so on and so forth, right? um, I just kind of like to give you a sense. I really don't want to demo Finout. I appreciate everybody for joining. I'm clearly representing Finout, so as a disclaimer, just kind of like to give you an example of a few. What does it really mean gaining visibility into AI cost, and kind of like some of the stuff that you really want to be on top of. So just an example here, right? Azure OpenAI, right? Let's say an organization is using OpenAI via Azure, and some of the metrics that you want to track, for example, is cached versus uncached input tokens, right? So as discussed, zero almost like cost, right? In the case of cached prompts versus not zero. So extremely important metric to follow and see trends over time, right? This is just one example, right? In the case that you are using actually multiple CSPs, and you want to be able to really see kind of like again a single view showing you the spend across your stack, right? So seeing trends over time, being able to really identify this information, get it pushed to you in an automatic manner. Um, Seeing, I think this is where it's starting to become very interesting, right? You want to see kind of like a side by side model utilization in organizations. So let's say in this example, and again, this is just demo data clearly, right? But you can see that over time, Claude, which is a very expensive model, usage is trending up, which again can be a good thing. Perhaps it's just it's booming in production. Everybody is super happy about it. But from a Finos perspective, you should be very much on top of that and understanding that okay, the most expensive model perhaps in my stack is the one that is everybody's keep using. So it raises a few questions, and starting it's a good conversation starter. Um, so I'm gonna wrap up with kind of like just highlighting what I would think that you want to do tomorrow morning. Let's say if this is really a concern for you guys, really mastering the LLM, the AI economics, right? So I think from a FinOps perspective, there is not necessarily a whole lot of news here, but it does require focus and attention. So setting up alerts and budgets. I think that in many cases, again, what I'm seeing across our customers is that there's this push from leadership. Hey, go showcase that you can actually bring it to production and provide meaningful value. That doesn't mean that even in the experimentation phase, almost, you don't want to have at least alerts to identify anomalies, and really understand usage patterns before they explode, really. And at some point along those journey, definitely push the organization toward having budgets in place. Um, it's almost unmanageable otherwise, right? Tagging, and I'm highlighting here enforcing naming convention. It's probably a topic for a whole different webinar, but there are many techniques here. There is the LLM proxy pattern that some people adopt, basically forcing all LLM requests to go through a single gateway as a mean to enforce the needed metadata and the needed tagging on it. But in any case, from the very beginning, right? You want to enforce naming convention. You want to make sure that you have the ability to actually identify a project, a feature, a user, a team that actually who's behind the given line of cost, right? And you want to be very, talking about cleanup mode, you want to be extremely strict about it, because again, fixing it backwards almost impossible, right? New stakeholders. I think this is interesting because for many organization, there are suddenly not the classic engineering teams that are actually the one that already have a relationship with FinOps and already follow some best practices in cloud. So you want to really, if this is the case in your organization, you want to build and nurture this relationship with new stakeholders, such as, for example, MLOps, it can be data science, it can be research teams, it can be even analysts in some cases. Um, and just wrap up with kind of like, you want to understand the unit economics here almost is kind of like, the price per token. Um, Try and push the organization towards, starting lean, and not necessarily start with the most expensive, models out there, and really escalate to those only if absolutely a must. And again, just to showcase kind of like how we do it here in Finout. So in Finout, we really bring in to the platform data from pretty much the entire spectrum of AI providers, including of course the hyperscalers like the CSPs. And what you can easily do, you can set up an alert, you can set up an anomaly alert, based on some budgets, really get it pushed to you very easily into Slack. Just as one example, right? Another example talking about how you want to engage, new stakeholders. So um, creating a custom dashboard that is tailored really for the needs of a given team that don't necessarily care about everything that we care in FinOps, but they do want to track, for example, how the GPU cost and usage is trending up or down. Um, you want to see kind of like which type of models are used, how much I'm using if in a certain implementation. I have, let's say, the smart assistant in this example, right? The smart assistant is just kind of like the ones that is using the most expensive model. This is kind of like the standard feature flow. And then there is this fallback to Haiku, which is a linear model. And you want to see those trends and how they really add up. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to thank you all for listening. Uh, and yeah, perhaps move to more interesting stuff. But definitely appreciate the time and attention here.
Thanks, Alan, for the talk, for the session. I think it was very enlightening. There are a few questions from the chat that, if you want, you can address them. I think there was one related to Finout, so feel free to share. And in the meantime, I will start with the panel, so all the questions will be addressed like in a few minutes. When we talk in the discussion, but we are going to start the panel now. And I want to start maybe with David. Have some questions, because based on what we've seen on the presentations, so there are tokens is one of the most spoken topics. But apart from token optimization and being able to create more specific prompts, what guidance do you have for the prompt engineers, for people that are doing this kind of prompts, to help them like create more cost specific prompts that are more efficient in terms of context usage, token usage? What are your experience in those?
I think one of the most important things is the prompt caching. So especially we have a lot of repetitive prompts, and this is especially important if you're using coding assistants, because coding assistants tend to have much bigger, larger prompts. Typically, you can prompt up to 1,024 tokens as a prefix and then cache that prefix. You are then not paying for the repeated use of those prefixes. So it's very important, especially for coding assistants, to develop a caching strategy with your prompts, because it will not only reduce your costs, it also can impact your performance, your latency. There are now, I think increasingly, I will say this, I think this is, right now it is a manual process. So it does mean you have to go through your prompts and figure out where the breakpoints are and set them up. The providers, Bedrock has just automated this. You can actually automate your where you set the prompts, and I think that's the trend. But I think in terms of managing the tokens, I think that's one of the most powerful cost lever tools that's out there right now.
Good stuff, good stuff. Yeah, as mentioned, the caching is one of the topics that It's one of the most important things since the release, and definitely it's helpful for, it's been there for the website, for the HTTP, for the connection to the database, and is now helpful for the AI. And moving on to a different topic, but also related to cost. Wanted to talk with you, Bainab, about the practical steps or actions that you have seen, that it can take down the token usage down to from pennies
Right,
or something non meaningful to something that
right.
it's something relevant
So
for the
one of the
users.
procedure David already spoken about, which is the caching and batching, right? Which anyway going to cut down your cost by 50%. Apart from that, what developers can do, they can actually tweak the quotas that they can set in the code itself in order to manage their tokens, right? So when I say managing their tokens or the quotas, they can set the token quotas, rating or limit the rates of their tokens. They can also play around with the the token limits as well within the code itself, so that it will not gonna use the higher level of the tokens, because generally what happens is people, without knowing, they will gonna be provisioning the token at a higher level, right? And usually it happens when you are using a custom model. So in custom model, usually people start using the higher compute or the token allocation for their LLMs, and that's where they make mistakes, and that's where the entire consumption play a vital role in terms of driving the cost and increasing the cost in your environment.
Yeah, that's totally true, and I think that's very relevant to not having like an anomaly issue or something that you are not
Correct.
checking for a month and then it's problematic.
Correct. Correct. And maximum or setting up the maximum token limits will gonna be enhancing not only the model, but also enhancing and optimizing the entire workload, right?
Mhm.
So Alan spoken about the LLM economics, right? I just wanted to spend some time on discussing about the AI economics as well, right? So there are certain different elements that we need to also consider while discussing about the economics of around the AI. That not only includes the LLM, that also includes the compute, the GPU. And I think
Mhm.
we have David over here, we who can talks about GPU more than anyone, and explain you better than anyone about the GPU things. But the compute is the first component or the element of mine. Second element would be my provision throughput, which we already spoken about. That could be your cache, your tokens, your batches. Then the token usage, of course. And of course, you will going to be having some storages, network, and some other stuff, which will going to be a supporting, the services that will going to be supporting your entire open AI. But the majority of your cost will going to go to the compute cost, to the provision throughputs that you're going to be having, that you are reserving for your model, right? And for your storage and token usage, right?
Mhm.
And apart from that, one of the biggest challenge that I have seen in my experience, maybe you can correct me, David, or from your experience, you can share some of your insights over there. What is the biggest challenge in the organization these days are, since none of the CSP doesn't have or doesn't provide the full capacity at to their customer. What they usually do, they basically provide you some certain capacity to support your model, right? And due to that limited capacity being provided by the CSP, people are using the AI capacity in the shared model, right, within their organization. And that's where the one of the biggest challenge comes in, wherein people are facing challenges in terms of allocating the cost that they are having inside that shared model to their multiple teams that they are, that the team that you are using, or that the team that being used, or the model data is being used by those multiple teams, right? And that's where the CSP provider also lacking. What they are lacking is because they don't provide these tokenized information in their cost and usage report. They provide these information in the API request, which tools like Finout, where it can help you out in terms of getting those visibility out of those API requests and tokenizations and tokens, or other tools also available in the market. But having said that, you don't have that visibility in your cost and usage report at all. What you have is only the view of how much I'm being charged for the cognitive services, but how many token have been used by my this team and other team is something which is completely missing, right? And
Yeah.
this is one of the pain point for most of the organization also, to distribute and allocate that cost to multiple team, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And I'd even say on top of that, there's a governance issue, because what I've seen is also an issue we've seen with AWS for a long time. I could, if I'm just some random developer, what's to stop me from going to RunPod or Vultr or whatever provider and just ordering a couple H100s and running for a couple hours? It's not a huge dollar amount, but clearly so you might look at it and say, well, it's not a big issue from a financial standpoint, but security obviously hates that. And I think especially when talking to startups, they have this problem. It's not just an allocation problem, it's a governance problem. So I think it's a very valid point, and I think one that's best solved up front rather than waiting for it to become an issue.
Just wanna quickly jump in here, and I think that Vipap point is very valid, and to the point. I think that there are some practices about tagging, kind of like the request that are often missed. Like you can, like again, putting aside what Finout can do or can do, just thinking about it from a Finout perspective in a given organization. And let's take AWS as an example because I think it's a pretty common one. And inference profiles, for example, right? And kind of like circling back to David's point about how you want to govern to begin with. So in my previous company, just before joining Finout, I was actually a PM for a team who developed kind of like LLM features. And we had our FinOps in this organization saying that I'm blocking every request going to Bedrock that does not have an inference profile. So inference profile is your way to really tag request in Bedrock. So kind of like circling to everything we just said here, this very, again, simple and not that and it's not kind of like an enforcement that necessarily create a whole lot of friction, because for the engineering, and to David's point, that I'm an engineer, I want to start using it, it's not really a hassle for me to use an inference profile, assuming somebody just told me how, where, and that's not a problem. It can be a major change as we look to the future, right? So
That's true. And moving on, because there are two, well, one topic that it's going to be like a starting of the questions, but one that I might not bring before is the compute. So as you know, there are part of we always forgot, like, you leave it to the LLM and the LLM is computed. We don't know where, and it happens like that. But when you're handling AI workloads that need to have compute, you need to think also about, apart from batching all this stuff, the commitment strategy and all these, the leverage of the different compute strategies to be able to save cost just for compute usage for the AI, nothing else apart from the LLM perspective. So maybe, David, from your experience on your company, what have you seen are the best practices for using this type of FinOps standard compute practices in the
Rough.
AI workloads?
I will say very rough, and I'll tell you why. First is that if you're running on AWS, the CSP discount rates on their GPUs, which are their most expensive, are some of their lowest. So what does that mean? So I think, for example, like the P5s have a 21% CSP discount. That means that they're the last to get the discount applied to them if you buy a CSP, right? Because it's got that low percent, just how AWS does it. So you're not getting that much bang for the buck. On top of that, AWS has traditionally pushed people into using something called capacity blocks, which are not RIs. They're non-cancelable commitments from 1 week to 6 months, where you actually say, I want whatever, a P4, which, like a hopper, and that's it. You're committed once you push the order. So it's actually a bit of a struggle. You're not going to get, at least for now, the benefits of RIs and CSPs to the same percentage that you do with traditional x86 or Gravitons. The one thing I will say, if you're really, really cost sensitive, is the best thing you can do is go to Trainium. Even, and I'm not endorsing it necessarily as a specific platform, but companies that I've talked to are really cost sensitive and they don't like the NVIDIA pricing. They go to, either the Google TPUs or they use a Trainium, because that's really what they're, they sort of force you to.
Okay, that's
Right.
a thoughtful. Yeah. But now go ahead.
One more point just wanted to add over here. From my experience, I'm going to be sharing using the managed services, right? Managed services, which means using the pre-built model that all of these ESP providers are providing you, or any kind of a managed services, like could be your SageMaker or ML managed endpoints. Using all of them can also cut down, sorry, not shut down, but the cut down to the cost of your entire compute, slash by, I think, somewhere around 20 to 25% of the cost you can save out of it. this is one of the experience that I have seen, wherein instead of working on the customized model or custom model, building and working on that and putting some efforts over there, and defining or using the high tokenized models over there. Instead of that, you can start consuming the existing model with having minimum capacity as well as minimum tokenized or token capabilities over there, which can also support the same the results that you are expecting to come out of that specific model.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very, it's a very interesting thing, like how you play with the compute and how model that, because there is a lot of factors in place. And starting a bit with the Q&A, I'm going to start with a question to Alon, because it was, I think, appeared when the presentation happened. So it was talking about the multi-model or the ability to use different models for different tasks. What's your perspective on there? How you can make the developers consider one model or the other for different tasks. What are your thoughts on there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And if I wasn't clear, I'm a huge supporter of, I would say it differently. I don't think that it makes sense to have kind of like a single model approach nowadays. It just doesn't. Because, on the one hand, actually implementing multiple models, so just literally using multiple models is so easy. So there is not kind of like an effort that should be invested upfront to actually use them. Because in most of the platforms nowadays, you can actually switch models very easily. And I think that's exactly the kind of thinking that should be adopted, because as with any other, right, when you think about any other technology, really, right, it's not just a cloud. Like, you want to use the leaner, most effective piece of technology that is best tailored to help you get your job done, right? And in many, many cases, in the case of LLM, a very lean model, very cheap one, can be the most effective one for many tasks, right? And if you can identify those, I'll give you an example, right, just to be a bit more, down to earth, right? So let's say there is a task where you want to analyze. We have it here in Finout, right? Like, we want to analyze sentiment of feedback you get from your users, right? This
Mm-hmm.
is it sounds like a complex task, but honestly, nowadays, like, any basic standard model can give you a pretty solid negative, positive. So it just doesn't make any sense to use. Of course, it won't be bulletproof, but it's typically gets the work done, right? As opposed to, let's say, coding. To David's point, that perhaps in those cases you do want, for some, I don't know, complex refactoring task, you want to use the state of the art model. So 100% yes to multimodal. Um, Different webinar we can discuss about how exactly to implement it, but I guess that's too much information at this point.
No, thanks for clarifying that. And wanted to, maybe something that it also it's an issue for teams is how people allocate. I think SS is asking here, and more people are asking here, the AI workload cost to the team. So how people are possible to break down this cost, and which technologies. I think tagging could be a system, naming convention, as always, you can use. But maybe, David, do you have any tips or tricks for the people about breaking down costs for AI workloads to teams?
Yeah. So the one thing I've discovered here is that, we talked earlier about just tagging the GPUs, is you still run into the issue of shared costs. So you need a strategy for tagging your Kafka clusters, SQS. A lot of these things you see in traditional CPU worlds are still there in GPUs. And if you don't have a strategy for allocating those costs, all the shared costs, NAT gateways, whatever you have running, it's going to still remain an issue. So I think having that in place in general is a very, very important step if you really want to do true unit costing or true product or even team level costing. I'd also say that, we talked a little bit earlier about just sort of the rogue GPU user. I think it's also good to have the tagging set up as soon as you start these contracts, because what I've seen is with GPUs being the Wild West, sometimes it's like, oh, we do one thing for CPUs, but we're, LLMs and we're still experimenting, and they don't have the same governance, they don't have the same tagging, they don't have the same processes in place. So get those processes in place up front so that you're not sort of chasing your tail and doing this after the fact, after costs have started to explode.
And just
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. Go
So
ahead,
sorry,
Aaron.
Victor, to cut you. Just kind of like to add one thing is that there are definitely in the case of, so first of all, I would say 100% to David's point about tagging, and have it very much intentional early in the process. But I would say that in the case of shared cost allocation, again, there are definitely tools that can help you do that. Finout is one of them, but there are definitely tools that can help you because again, this is not an LLM problem. This is just a problem of shared
Yes.
cost. So there are best practices how to handle it, and we allow, like I would say in the case of Finout, and I think again I will be honest and say that our competitors are doing similar stuff. Basically, you can do what we call virtual tagging, where you can basically just break after effect the cost based on some other metadata field that perhaps are available. But so definitely, bottom line, there are tools that can really allow you to simplify this process. So
And I'd add one thing to
Right.
that. I think, and I know, Finout has an integration with Datadog. There's a lot of great information sitting in observability tools. And I think one of the things that is different with AI is it really helps to have that observability data that you're getting from Datadog or Afana, Honeycomb, whatever tool you're using, and integrate that with your FinOps system so that you're not just looking at it strictly from a question of GPU, who's using it, but all the hits to the endpoints, all that, the actual traffic, all the traces and spans. You can actually get a very nice view of the traffic broken out by teams, by application, when you integrate with your observability provider. And I think that's a really great way to get a good holistic view of cost and consumption.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what I supposed to also add on, right? Meaning that none of the CSP providers provide any kind of a metadata around the tokens distribution, right? And in order to distribute the token, what you have to have some tool in place. Likewise, Aaron spoken about the tool, which could be customized tool, like David spoken about. You can use Datadog. You can also use Microsoft own application insight or monitoring or the capability of the native tools as well in order to distribute those tokens and then assign those to the relevant teams or the tagging. But for that, you need some effort to have those dashboard to be created manually, and that will going to be needing some effort to create those views and dashboard. And that's where I think tools like Finout or maybe the tools that just spoken by David, we can use them in order to get that visibility for
Yeah.
how those metadata can be distributed in between
Yeah.
the teams.
All the visibility and all the observability that you can get and you can then reuse to match to your costs, it's welcome. And there are definitely tools that can help you there. And one, I think there is a couple more interesting questions and maybe more tricky ones. Is the so the sorry the tokens in terms of subscription model, but what do you think about when you're using a model that is those offering the services? So you are offering the AI service on your own. How are you controlling the cost? What are the tactics for someone that is offering AI, let's say wrappers, AI tools? Maybe David, you can shine a light on that about people that are using AI models as a business service. How they can prevent not getting this wrap or not making your
So
business
we talked, I
to
think, a few minutes ago about prompt caching. So if you're running the models, right, and this is something that the large providers do, is you've now got a cache on the other side, which is your output tokens. Because especially with long context windows, and I think I saw a question about that, what's going to happen
Mhm.
is you're going to run into memory limits on the other side, not from input, but from output. And obviously, the way an LLM works, it's got to remember the whole conversation. So one of the most important things you do on this side is develop a caching strategy around your key value cache or KV cache. Um, Not just how to optimize it in terms of the window, in terms of what's going to get kept, but also where to put it. So one of the things we're seeing is a lot of providers are offloading that out of memory because the reality is memory bandwidth and especially memory capacity is just not keeping up with the rate of growth in output tokens and context windows. And again, the coding assistant use cases are the ones that really seem to push the edge here. And so what you're going to ultimately need to do is have a caching strategy for those output tokens, and also depending on your scale, where you're going to put them. So if you run out of memory, do you go to disk? Do you go to a memory pool? Do you use like Triton or TensorRT or one of the NVIDIA services? along with that to help optimize your output tokens. And the other issue that, and so there's ways obviously you can measure this. It's not just cost, because when I look at it, a lot of times this isn't just done simply for cost, it's performance, and especially time to first token and time in between tokens. You want to measure those in terms of milliseconds, because a lot of that will drive not just a cost decision in how you want to run these models, but that price performance. I want to just add that now this is where it gets even a little more interesting, is that coding pushes the limits of context windows. Coding is also often less latency sensitive. So it's a weird trick here, because a lot of the like batch processing, for example, that's often used for coding assistance, because if you're compiling code or you're merging in with the CI/CD pipeline, you can wait a day, you don't care. The business user is not waiting a day, they're waiting milliseconds. So the irony here is the heavy users often have the lightest latency requirements. So you have to mix and match the workloads. And what I say as a matter of practice, what this ends up being is you need dual workload profiling, profile for your business users and profile for your developers, and then determine what the optimal mix is, and then what can be segregated out so that you're minimizing the spend on additional hardware or additional software to manage the output tokens.
That's one of the interesting things about that. Like, the different perspective, and there was a question on that, like the different perspective of the AI users and what you mentioned about, when you are coding, you can wait a bit, see the full thing going through. If you are using it I've seen it for video editing even, like I've seen like the model work for, I don't know, 20 minutes on its own, and the video edit happen. But then when you are like playing around with a tool that you want a quick response, that you want, for example, change a text or update a text or do something like that, you cannot wait like for an hour or for something, because you want the response now. So it's very interesting, the finding that you have shared, David, about the context and the amount of time that we are waiting to wait. And adding on maybe an interesting question from Jess. Well, I will do this one first, and then I will end up with the one with Jess. Any, maybe Binap, we can help us here. Any trade-offs of using batching apart from the delay that you may have? What are the trade-offs that you have seen by the use of batching with AI workloads?
So the trade-offs that I see is only around. See, basically what we have to do, we have to understand two things when we are discussing about the AI. One is the NLP, right? So everyone is talking about the NLP, LLMs, and everything. There are some solutions which are also there, which do also have some other mechanism wherein it doesn't require any kind of NLP and it works on the API models, right? So having said that, these areas also needs to be discussed, wherein I spoken about the four elements of your AI cost, right? One is compute GPU, second would be your the provisioned throughputs that you have and the token usage, and I missed the fourth one, which I'm supposed to tell you about, the API calls, right? So the output that we just spoken about, or David beautifully just spoken about, the how you can control those output, how you can do that trade-offs between the all of these models. So it is very important to understand that what kind of a model that you're using and what kind of a a multiple model usage that Alan spoken about. So there are some models wherein you can train your model with the multiple. I'm just giving one hypothetical example of vision capability, right? So in the vision, you have model where you can train your model with 12 or 15 photos graphs, right? In order to get some output. At the same time, you have another model, right, which can support you in terms of getting the output with the 2 photographs, right? So having said that, you are training your model more, with quite precisely, wherein you are using the model in a way that doesn't need that training, and also the output will be having or being output, or I mean, will gonna be given to you on a basis of a specific workload, right? Or so with the specific data itself, which will gonna be used at a very convenient way by the users. That's one, right? Second, what we have is about the uh, uh, sorry, I missed the other portion. So the vision we spoken about, wherein you can use these models, and second is the sequential memory, right? So while training the data, right? So you need to have some memory. We spoken about the caching, right? So there are sequential based training. You also have incremental based training models available. So you need to be, predominantly uh, be diligent or be precise in terms of while discussing, while defining, or while designing your entire solution, how it's going to be built. I mean, one of the question I have seen in the chat bot, inside the chat as well as in the Q&A that someone spoken about, whether we should start early or maybe in the middle of our development. So always start early, talking about, or defining the right model to be chosen at the right time would be costing you lesser than what will going to be costing you in the middle of your development. So that's what I think, and this is one of the the insight that I can provide you from my experience that I have.
Good deal. I think it was a thoughtful answer, and it answers a lot. You bring also the vision part, the image part, which is always forgotten. I have to say that I have started working on that side when I was starting my career, and it's very forgotten into the whole tokens and the whole LLM part,
Right.
except that for Nano Banana release and all this stuff that is very fun when they release. But it's a very interesting part, and it's also very used for batching. So if you are especially using that workloads, I think apart from there is not much. And I have a very good question from Jess, and maybe Alon can help us here. Is what are your views on bringing finance into this type of conversation? Culture and governance, all this is a major area. Given that the LLMs are something that retroactively, even though it's changing a lot, like how do you involve finance in these conversations that are very technical and tricky?
That's a very good question. I think that oftentimes, is very much relevant, to the context of what we're talking about today here in the realm of AI. But to me, it's one of those big questions that is relevant to pretty much everything we do in FinOps. Um, I would say that in this case, and again, this is just my opinion, right? Like, don't take it as an expert or anything else. But I think there is actually an opportunity here because this is a topic that my mom find interesting, right? So it's not this kind of like a topic that is hard to get people engaged. So there is an opportunity here to really bring in people that, while it is a complex topic, the level of engagement is probably way higher than it will be with some other cases. So I think it's a good opportunity. I will definitely start personally. This is what I will always recommend. Start by invite them, have them sit at the table. If at some point they will start blurring at their computers, then okay. But no harms in trying to push them into these discussions and try to get them engaged. Like,
Yeah, I know we're short on time, but I run into this a lot. My background is actually in finance, and I worked in engineering, went back to finance, went back to engineering. So keeping the two teams on the same page is very important. I think organizationally one of the most important things you do. What I've always found is the bridge is KPIs. You don't want to have these meetings where it's a bunch of engineers, as a finance person's come in because there's cost issues, and then 5 minutes later they're on their phone and they're bored because the conversation is too technical. What I find works is having a series of operational KPIs that both finance is tuned into and engine is tuned into. So for example, cost to decrease time to first token, cost to decrease time to between tokens, cost to automate prompt engineering, cost to automate prompt caching, or ratios. Like when you set the practice on a few key metrics, and I say anywhere from 3 to 6 to 7, somewhere in that range, and meet on these and align on these, it's a great way for finance to have a seat at the table. They can understand these simple concepts, and you can have a thoughtful conversation rather than having a budget talk one way, an optimization talk another way, and then you're just talking past each other, and it's a waste of everyone's time.
That's it. Yeah, I think involving them, measuring it, translating, as always that we talk in FinOps, right? Translating it to a language that they can understand in a finance, perspective, in a finance language, in a business language that they can understand, related to KPI, unit economics that we have talked about, business metrics, and not leaving a bit, the engineering, more technical part that it's not that relevant for them. It's the way to go, and I think that's what we need to collaborate, and we need to bring them to the conversation, moving on to a more finance perspective. So just to clarify before we end, yeah, there will be access to the recording of the session. I will try to give it to you in the email afterwards. I think it should around like be either tomorrow or the day before, or the day after, sorry. We'll upload it to YouTube as well. So you will be able to check the session. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alon, David, and Bainab for being here today. I hope you enjoyed the session and you had a great time.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
thanks everybody for
Thanks a
joining.
lot.
I hope you had a great time, and see you in the next event, and soon to have more news. Thanks everybody for joining. Hope you had a great time. Bye
Yep.
bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.